Hello there. Welcome to the Saroid channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. As you can hear, I've got a cold, but I hope that is not going to put you off the story tonight, because boy, have I got a lovely story for you. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with our new story tonight. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the annoying banging on the front door was persistently loud, very obtrusive. Fern almost jumped out of her skin when she first heard it, for it gave her quite the start. It was dark outside, for goodness sake. Who in their right mind called at this time of the evening? Fern had been sitting comfortably in the lounge, on the new sumptuously cosy couch that she had recently purchased from an up-and-coming furniture store in Atlanta, which stocked some of the most comfortable furnishings that she'd ever had the pleasure to lay eyes on. But much like everything that Fern tended to like, it had come with an impossibly hefty price tag that threatened to break the bank. But once Fern had laid eyes on that couch, she couldn't leave the store without buying it. Besides, she persuaded herself, this was a present to herself, to celebrate her brand new beginnings at Fairfield House, which was a new chapter in her life, one she hoped, in the foreseeable future, would include a couple of rambunctious but reasonably well-behaved children running around the place. She was relaxing on her couch, wearing a pair of black leggings and a big oversized sweatshirt that seemed to swallow up her rather slender frame. She was watching an episode of Friends with Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox, while enjoying a glass of very good Sauvignon Blanc. She had planned to enjoy a quiet evening by herself, with her cat Julian watching television, and then she would retire to bed early. Someone, whoever they were, that was standing outside the front door, was rudely ruining her peace by their persistent banging of the door and relentless ringing of the bell. Fern's marmalade cat, Julian, was lying across her lap and contentedly stretching out his ginger paws. Julian had been a surprise gift from her husband Larkin, who had picked up the cat at the shelter for his wife as a surprise.
I thought he would be a nice comfort for you, to have a furry friend while I'm away working. When you can't cuddle up to me, you've got an agreeable alternative, a good companion. Only one condition on this, though. I don't want you to love the cat more than me.
Well, said Fern, giving Larkin a mischievous wink, there's a big possibility that I just might love Julian more than I love you. You never know when you come home. I might insist you sleep in the spare bedroom. You've got big competition here, Larkin. I hope you realize that. Julian is an incredibly handsome cat.
Larkin laughed. Don't you dare even think about it, he said, waving a finger at Fern, but there was a mischievous twinkle in his chocolate-brown eyes that were always so spirited and full of humour. Just so you know, I especially asked for the laziest, most soppy cat in the entire shelter, and they picked up Julian for me, without any hesitation. This is the one you're looking for, they said to me. Apparently he is soppy, affectionate, and incredibly lazy, and I knew that meant he ticked all the right boxes for you. The shelter says everybody loves Julian. I think they actually had tears in their eyes when I took him away. They were very fond of him, you see.
Well, I can see why, said Fern, stroking the affectionate cat that had been rubbing his ginger coat against her and purring profusely. Why is he called Julian? She asked.
I've got no idea, her husband Larkin had said, but it's kind of a cool name, don't you think? I do think it rather suits him.
Julian was looking up at Fern's face with his amber eyes when the banging on the door continued, as if he too felt slightly disquieted by the commotion going on outside the front door, followed by the steady stream of the high-pitched bell going through the house in its screeching sing-song tune. Larkin had recently installed the shrill bell, and Fern was already annoyed with it. I mean, who had a song like this playing in their house when guests called? It rang out a very juvenile age-old nursery rhyme. Around and around the mulberry bush goes the teddy bear. Only Larkin could have picked a ringtone like this, but he said it was cool because his mother used to sing him that song
when he was 2 years old, so it was oddly nostalgic for him. Whoever was at the front door, they seemed pretty determined for Fern to answer, which made her all the more reluctant to do so. It was 7 o'clock in the evening, which might not be late for many, but it was already pitch black outside, and the moon this evening had gone into early retirement. The stars were bashfully hiding their bright little faces behind a grim, thick, tenebrific curtain of cloud cover, so it was less than an auspicious night. Besides, it was fall, and the nights had got significantly cooler. Granted, there were street lights on in the neighbourhood, but as far as Fern was concerned, no one expected to receive visitors at this unwelcome time, even if many would still consider it early. Fern resolutely believed there were boundaries in life, things you did and did not do, when you were a courteous human being, and one of those things was not rocking up on people's front doorstep when the sky had turned black. There were 2 exceptions to those rules, of course: emergencies, people requiring help, or the police calling. The latter thought alarmed Fern somewhat. The last thing she wanted was a call from the police, as when they dropped over to your house, then there was something to worry about, and it was always bad news. Everybody knew that. This evening Fern had really wanted to shut the world out and remain cosily tucked away in her comfortable burrow, but something was sniffing outside the front door, like an insistent cadaver dog, and seemingly determined to get her attention. If it was important, she needed to get the door, she reasoned with herself. This better be good, she mumbled under her breath, letting out a resigned sigh that was so loud that Julian's head jerked up to look at Fern straight in the face, with a pair of almost questioning amber eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry, Julian," said Fern reluctantly, finding herself apologizing to the cat. She pushed Julian off her lap. "I've got to go and answer that door. It might be important." She slipped her small feet into a pair of slippers and reticently made her way to the door. The bell continued to rudely play around and around the mulberry bush over and over again, and worse still, the pounding continued on the door. "All right," she cried out. "I'm coming." Whoever was at the front door, did they know how to exercise any restraint? Fern had recently moved into Fairfield House with her husband Larkin, who was a pilot that regularly flew on international flights all over the world. She only ever got to see him when he wasn't working, so right now he was on the other side of the globe, no doubt either flying through the clouds or booking into some fabulously lavish, luxurious hotel somewhere with other members of his flying crew, while she was stuck here at home alone. Fern had never envisaged marrying a pilot, and there were spouses that could not easily handle their partners being away for so long. Fern was well aware that there was a great risk of infidelity being married to a pilot. You heard of pilots shacking up with air hostesses all the time, but Larkin was not the kind of man that would have his head easily turned by a pretty face. He was devotedly loyal, which was one thing Fern adored about her husband. She knew she could trust him with her life. It was her father that had told Fern that marrying a pilot was probably not a good idea, and she had wholeheartedly agreed with him on that. She certainly didn't want to be stuck at home without Larkin for long periods of time, while she watched her friends happily enjoying the weekends with their other halves. She knew there would be so many times that she returned home to an empty house, with a bowl of cornflakes served with ice-cold milk, or a very bland-looking TV dinner to eat all on her own. "I can't marry you," she had told Larkin once. "You're away from home for far too long. It could never work out between the 2 of us."
"We can make it work," Larkin had insisted. "I love you, Fern. Where there's a will, there's a way. I know being married to a pilot is not easy, but you're the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I'm not going to let you just go."
The reality was Fern could not imagine living her life without Larkin, as her heart had doggedly ruled her head. So the couple had decided to get married after all, despite the stats that had been stacked against them. I mean, if the truth be told, you could not choose who you fell in love with, could you? On her wedding day, Fern's own father had discreetly taken his daughter to one side and asked Fern, in no uncertain terms, if she was absolutely sure she knew what she was doing.
"You can change your mind, love, you know you can," he said, giving her a nudge on the shoulders. "No one will think any less of you. It's not too late to change your mind."
But Dad, it's my wedding day, Fern had protested, appalled by her father's suggestion. Don't you get it, Dad? I love Larkin. We're getting married today. I've thought about this long and hard, and we're going to make our marriage work. I'm hardly going to change my mind after we've organised this huge wedding. Look at all the expense you've gone to with this exclusive venue. I'm not going to throw in the trowel now, am I?
It's only money, love, her father had said. I'm footing the bill. It's not a big deal for me. But what is a big deal, Fern, is your life. You're still so young, love. Sometimes with youth comes naivety. I want you to know what you're committing your life to. And that is a man that is not always going to be there for you when you need him the most. You need to think about that long and hard, love.
What's your problem, Dad? You look so concerned, almost as if I've told you I'm about to move into a convent and take a vow of chastity. Why are you so worried about me marrying Larkin? I love him. Isn't that enough?
Don't joke about this, love. This is no laughing matter. I'm being deadly serious. In any moment now, you're going to be walking down that red carpet with me at your side. You need to ask yourself this. Is love enough, sweetheart? Because sometimes it's not, you know.
Her father said this, his bushy eyebrows coming together to form a large caterpillar. Fern loved it when he gave her that look, because it made him all the more endearing.
I like Larkin very much, don't get me wrong, he assured her. He's a good man, a man of substance, and he has great integrity. That's what I like about him.
Then what's your problem, Dad? You're making a mountain out of a molehill out of this. If you don't believe Larkin will cheat on me with some air hostess, why do you look so solemn? This is my wedding day, Dad. You're supposed to be happy, but you look as if you're about to attend my funeral, not my wedding. If Mum saw you now giving me this advice, she'd lose it with you. She's very excited about today, and she loves the fact that I'm marrying a pilot.
Sweetheart, I'm not remotely concerned what your mother thinks or believes. She thinks the sunshine grows out of Larkin's backside. But as your father, I'm entitled to have my misgivings about the man. You are my only daughter. I want nothing more for you than to live a fulfilling and very happy life. While I agree with you that Larkin is the faithful type, that is unlikely to ever run off with an air hostess, I need you to know that it's not what is ailing me, love. The truth is relationships are challenging at the very best of times. I know I've been married to your mother all my life, and she's not always been easy to love. You know what she's like.
Yes, I do, Dad. And I do admire you for putting up with her, and her emotional outbursts. I know her bipolar hasn't been easy for you, especially when she pretends to have taken her medication. So as a family, we've been on some roller coaster rides for sure. Dad, you've been a saint putting up with Mum, and she has been difficult. But Larkin isn't like her.
That is not the point, love. Besides, this has nothing to do with your mother. This is all about you. I don't want you to have too many challenges in your life. Life is hard enough already. I worry about you, love, getting lonely when Larkin is away. I'm sure that being a pilot's wife has got to be tough. If I had been a pilot, your mother would have left me a long time ago. You know what your mother's like. She cannot stand to be left alone.
You're right, Dad. Mum would never have tolerated you being away from home. Besides, she'd be so suspicious of the air hostesses coming on to you too strong. She'd trust you, but never them. And it would have done her head in. But, Dad, I'm not my mother. I may look remarkably like her with dark hair, blue eyes and fair skin. But guess what, Dad? That's where the similarity begins and ends.
Love, I know all that. Of course I do. But what you need to consider is the very real possibility that you could begin to resent Larkin for never being there when he misses out on your child's first birthday party, or when your toddler takes his first step, or speaks his very first word. What if, God forbid, some kind of calamity strikes, when you really need your husband's support? You need him at your side, to take charge over everything. Larkin may well be on the other side of the world. He can't be at your side at a moment's notice. These things need to be considered, love. Then when he's away, as I keep going over and over again, you could get lonely. I mean, if I was stuck at home without your mother, as infuriating as she can be at times, I would feel utterly miserable."
"Well, maybe you're right, Dad, but I love Larkin. I can't throw what we have away. Yes, I wish he wasn't a pilot, I really do, but it just can't be helped. It is what it is." Fern's father's salient words flashed across her mind while she rose to her feet from the couch. Being alone in this house with a loud banging at the front door that she felt compelled to answer made her feel extremely vulnerable. How she wished Larkin were at her side. The couple had only moved into the close about 2 months ago, so she was still getting her bearings as you do when you settle down in a new home. There were a few home improvements that she was working on of late, and she was reasonably satisfied with her progress, and was enjoying industriously injecting her creative flair around the house in all kinds of home improvements. The move, of course, had been Larkin's idea. He said he was tired of living in a big bustling city like Atlanta, so living 3 hours away from the main airport was not a big deal for him, from a commuting standpoint, he had assured her. Fern believed Larkin had wanted to move here so that Gemma would feel as if she was living among friends, so she might not feel unduly isolated, as she had done in Atlanta, where she'd not even been on first-name terms with her next-door neighbours. Here in Fairfield Close she had 2 neighbours on either side of her, as the houses in this cosy street were huddled rather close together, like mischievous giggling children in a playground, sharing a whimsical secret together. It would seem most of the houses looked uncannily alike, like children in school uniforms, wearing an array of different pastel shades, but in the same style of dress, of course. Fern did not mind that the houses were built in such close proximity to each other, as the quaint neighbourhood had a village-like vibe to it, so that you could quite literally pop around to your next-door neighbours to borrow a bowl of sugar. Ostensibly the front and back yards in Fairfield Close, although small and contained in the seasonal months of summer and spring, were always an explosion of colours. So it was very clear the people around here were blessed with green fingers. Flowers would unapologetically tumble out of terracotta containers and hanging baskets, and everything would be so aesthetically pleasing to the eye. Fern didn't have the first clue how to grow plants or flowers of any kind, so being surrounded by so many expert gardeners was a tad intimidating for her, to say the very least, but she would do her level best to try and fit in. The great thing about Fairfield Close is you didn't have to walk very far to get to the local town. Sometimes Fern had cycled there on her bicycle and brought home stuff from the local deli, such as delicious salamis and pastrami-style meats, and at the baker's she'd brought French macaroons, Danish pastries and croissants, which she occasionally got to enjoy with Larkin, if he was around. She liked the feeling of being in the countryside, where it wasn't uncommon to see a horse and rider trotting down the street. The rider would always give her a friendly wave, almost as if they were on familiar terms together. Fern liked the open friendliness of the countryside and its people. Better still, she was living close enough to urban conveniences, which is why she and her husband Larkin had been attracted to moving here in the very first place. When they first moved into the house, Fern had been a tad apprehensive about such a dramatic change of scene. Fairfield House was the original house built on the close before the other houses erupted around it, that seemed to almost germinate here overnight, like mushrooms in a meadow, after the summer rains had fallen. Larkin had warned her that the double-storey house he was taking his wife to see might need some tender loving care, whatever that was supposed to mean. What were the words he'd used exactly? Oh yes, Fern remembered.
The house, love. Where how do I put it delicately? As I was saying, it's perfectly lovely, brimming over with so much potential, but it's in need of a wee bit of a makeover.
When Fern had first viewed Fairfield House, she understood exactly what Larkin was talking about. He had not warned her that the hideous place was in such a dilapidated state of disrepair. A little makeover, Fern had secretly thought to herself, when she'd stared at the house in incredulous disbelief. A little makeover, she repeated to herself again. Are you kidding me? The best thing for this run-down shack of a house is to be bulldozed and to start all over again. But she kept those sorry thoughts to herself, as she didn't want to ruffle Larkin's feathers by offending him. Fern, for the life of her, could not believe that Larkin could be so beguiled by something so unbecoming and sinister-looking as Fairfield House. There was no denying the broad beam on his face that was so large he looked rather like the cat that had got all the cream, and much more besides. What was he seeing in the sorry excuse for a house that she failed to see in any positive or endearing light, she wondered. Larkin looked at his wife and said,
"Isn't it dreamy, Fern? It is dreamy. We can build our lives here, in this cosy little close. I can just see it, can't you? Our children running around the front yard."
Fern did not answer. Her throat had become dry and parched. "I don't like it, Larkin," she mumbled under her breath. But Larkin failed to hear her. He was so caught up in his revelry. Fern later learnt that her neglected, forsaken house was initially known by the children in Fairfield Close as the Witch's Lair, and she could perfectly understand why. It seemed like the ideal house for a witch. The bleak, oppressive, ivory-coloured house, with its peeling paint, rust stains all over the walls, burgeoning vines, and twisted gnarled creepers, was covered indiscriminately with dust and cobwebs that looked like they had been there for years and years. It gave the house an abandoned, very unwelcoming appearance, where you got the profound sense that you would be wise to stay the hell away from the place, as if the house itself was screaming out to you to go away. Fern was sure if she was a child, viewing this ugly house through a child's impressionable, highly suggestible eyes, she would think the house was grotesque and horrible. She would likely believe an evil witch resided here, who cast out vicious spells on those she did not like, to extract her ultimate revenge. The witch probably owned a black cat called Pegasus, and a magic broomstick that she flew every night. She lightly hovered around the houses in the close, to see what children she could turn into toads, and their parents would wonder why their children had all mysteriously vanished into thin air. Fern tried to push those imaginings away from her mind, like the rain from a windscreen wiper. She thought the house was absolutely awful. There was no other way to describe it, even if you were being kind. The place just embodied the sense of rampant decay. The wood in the sash windows was beginning to warp from rising damp. The decaying front door looked like it was rotting at the very bottom and needed replacement. If that wasn't bad enough, the front yard was badly overgrown, and if there had ever been flowers in this yard, they were long forgotten about, for everything had been viciously and indiscriminately destroyed and taken over by the burgeoning creepers, vines, and ugly weeds with their thorny leaves that were tall and ugly, and seemed intent on spreading their foliage like great big beds of cabbages that left no space for anything else to breathe. So any pretty plants would have long since been suffocated to death. To say it was unsightly would have been kind. Fern had wondered how anyone could put a house on the market in this decrepit, sorry state. Did they really have no shame? When the couple's car had rolled up to the side of the house, Fern had noticed a rusty, bedraggled old for sale sign that was still barely managing to stand up straight. Had been there for a very long time. It almost looked decayed and forlorn, like the house itself. No doubt there had not been a salient person around, eager to purchase this place, until, of course, Larkin came along. Larkin had looked at Fern with a childlike, enthusiastic grin on his face that rather reminded her of a boy who's just received a train set for Christmas. Larkin always saw the positive in every situation, which made him a good pilot, of course, as in the event of a disastrous catastrophe, he would be the last person to panic. He'd lightly say, "Don't worry, folks. We've lost power in the plane. It's about to crash. But don't worry, brace yourself for a very safe landing." "So what do you think, Fern?" he asked, reaching out to squeeze his young wife's arm. "I thought you said the place needed a makeover. It needs bulldozing, that's what it needs," said Fern, her lips tightening. "You said it was in disarray, but this place is actually falling apart."
"You're overreacting, Fern. The place is not falling apart. I told you I got an independent private surveyor to look over the property. I'm glad to report it's got excellent bones. We can get it fixed up before we move in. You know what the surveyor told me, Fern?
Fern rolled her eyes in the back of her head. What did he say then, Larkin? She said sarcastically. Go on, tell me. Let's guess, shall we? He told you the place is wonderful. You should get your checkbook out at once and invest in this pile of rubble. I wonder, is he getting any commission on this place or not? Larkin was in such an upbeat mood that he failed to notice the sting in his wife's words and the distinct look of disapproval she wore on her face.
If you must know, love, he said they don't make houses like this anymore, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. He said the foundations are absolutely solid. The surveyor believes this place has oodles of potential, lots of promise. Furthermore, the roof is in perfect condition, which means there is limited damage to the interior of the house. There's a little damp, that's all, but it's easily sorted out. He advised me to snap it up at once. He said all the imperfections you see are superficial. They can be easily fixed.
Does he even know what he's talking about? The surveyor, I mean.
He's a surveyor, love. Of course he knows what he's talking about. It's his job to look at anything that could potentially be a problem. He does not believe this house would require much work. He says it could be fixed up in a couple of months and ready for us to move in at once. So what do you say, love?
Well, he must be blind. Is he blind by any chance? Because I fail to see any good in this house. I really do.
That's because it's been neglected for so long, love. And that's understandable that you should feel this way. I suspect most people have felt the way you do, which is why nobody has snapped the place up. But just imagine, when everything's fixed up, how charming it will all look.
I'm sorry, Larkin. I don't want to be a killjoy here. I really don't. I can see how enthusiastic you are about this house. But I'm sorry, we're not going to buy this place. It's a hideous dump. I never expected this from you, Larkin. I thought the place would probably need a lick of paint or something benign like that. Just a few nips and tucks here and there. But you under-exaggerated its shoddy condition to me.
Sweetheart, it's going for a song. Look around you at this idyllic village-like setting. All these charming character houses, here in the close. Isn't this kind of a dreamy place? We can bring our children up here one day.
If it was one of these other houses here in the close that we were moving into, I would agree with you, Larkin. But this house is wretchedly horrible. I hate it. I'm sorry, but I don't believe it could ever look nice.
Don't be so defeatist, Fern. Listen to yourself. Give the house a chance, will you? Don't judge a book by its cover. You haven't even looked around it yet. You might be quite surprised by how charming it is on the inside.
And I don't want to look around it either, said Fern, wrapping her arms around her chest tightly, in a rather defensive stance that made her look like a spoilt schoolkid, having a big bad sulk because her father simply refused to buy her a blueberry popsicle.
Try and see the bigger picture, love. Once we've spent some good money on this place and hired some builders, this will look better than all the other houses in the close, and I'll put money on it.
You really believe that, Larkin? Said Fern sarcastically. I seriously doubt it. I think you're being delusional.
Oh, there she is,
said Larkin, pointing to a demure woman who hid her dark eyes behind a pair of tortoiseshell spectacles. She climbed out of her small little Fiat. She was wearing a blue jacket and a matching skirt, with a sensible pair of flat pumps on her feet. She looked like she was in her early 20s.
That's the estate agent, Miss Weaver. She showed me around this place last week. A very nice lady she was, too. She was telling me the owner has dropped the price of the house quite substantially, in order to get a quick sale.
Before Fern could protest any further, the eager estate agent bustled over to their white Lexus, with a warm smile on her face. Fern could see there was a hopeful glint in Miss Weaver's eyes, that rather reminded her of a dog that is hoping its owner has returned home with some bones. Miss Weaver's going to be bitterly disappointed, Fern thought to herself defiantly. There is no way over my dead body we are buying this dump. I do not know what Larkin was thinking about, but I refuse to live in a place like this. I point blank refuse. The place is probably even haunted. It looks so sinister. Fern had climbed very reluctantly out of the car, as what else could she actually do? She knew she would humour the estate agent by saying the right things, as Fern had always been a bit of a people-pleaser, and she didn't like to cause offence. She'd be on her best behaviour today. But when she returned home with Larkin, she would discourage him from getting any wild ideas about this place. What on earth was he thinking, bringing her out here all this way? She could see how excited he was. His brown eyes had lit up like a Christmas tree. But I'm sorry, she did not share in his childlike enthusiasm for the place.
"Hello, Miss Weaver. It's good to see you again. This is my wife Fern that I was telling you all about. I told you I wanted to bring her round to show her the place. It's very nice of you, Miss Weaver, to take me around a second time."
"No nonsense! It's my job, Mr. Estelle. It's a pleasure to do so. It's very good to meet you, Mrs. Estelle," said the estate agent, shaking Fern's hand. "Likewise," Fern had said, but her lack of enthusiasm and the flatness in the tone of her voice spoke volumes. Miss Weaver took one hard look at Fern and knew exactly what she was dealing with. Over the years she was used to accommodating all measure of potential customers, but people like Mrs. Estelle were the very worst. They were the perennial cynics that liked to buy houses in apple pie order, with everything close to perfect. If a house was badly bruised, they seemed to fail to see the potential in a place, as if their vision was badly impaired. She knew she'd have her work cut out for her this morning, trying to convince this young lady, who was only, she suspected, a little older than herself, that Fairfield House was oozing potential. "Look, I know what you're thinking, Mrs. Estelle, and I want you to know I agree. People always get a terrible shock when they see Fairfield House. It does look as if it's falling apart, but as your husband will tell you, from the surveyor's brutally honest report, the place has very strong bones. I assure you, with a facelift, it'll look as good as new again, and my bet is it could end up being one of the finest houses in the close, and I really mean it. So there we are, that's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, good night and goodbye.